Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. We would like to welcome you to today's virtual event, the GovMates Institute Creating Value in Growing Government Contractors. First off, we'd like to wish you a happy new year and we hope that you are staying safe and healthy and that you're kind of kicking off 2021 in a really great way. I am Meg Kearns. I'm the marketing lead for GovMates and GovMates Consortium, and I'm here to keep an eye on the Q&A and the chat areas, as well as be tech support for any of today's discussion pieces. If you have technical questions as you get into this regarding your viewer experience, please just let me know in the chat and I'll go ahead and help you out with that. With that, let's go ahead and get into some participation reminders for today. We encourage you to remove distractions. So close your email, silence your cell phones, wear headphones for the best user experience. We invite you to be active in the chat, which means there's a Q&A section and a chat section that you can utilize for any of the questions that you may have as our panelists discuss things. In the right corner, you'll be able to see the viewer options as well on your screen if you have that option, where you can see all of the presenters as well as the presentation. And we invite you to do that as well. To get things started, now we do recommend that you place your name, your contact information, and your business name in the chat. Make sure to choose to all panelists and attendees. Use it as a digital business card. And remember that in a small screen, less is definitely more. That way, anyone who is on the call today can contact you if they choose to do so post-event. Finally, there will be a replay. We do encourage you to pay attention, but there will be a replay sent out post-event as well as these slides that are coming through. We'll send that out to you by email as well as a survey at the very end. That does it for my quick talk time today, and I'm happy to throw the reins over to Stephanie Alexander, who is the co-founder of GovMates and GovMates Consortium, who's going to be serving as our moderator today. And Stephanie, I will hand things over to you.
Thank you, Meg. Hello, GovMate Nation. Welcome to 2021, where we hope it's not quite the 2020 that we had. Moving on, although I will admit this is still a Zoom call, it's not in person, unfortunately, and I'm still in my yoga pants for all of those still keeping track. But I swear, one of these days we will see you in person. I am super excited to get us started with our 2021 rollout on today's topic, creating value in growing GovCons. And these people are experts in their field. They know what they're doing. And so I'm excited to dive deep into various aspects of this. So without further ado, you guys know we go fast, we go direct, and we go hard hitting. So Scott, who are you and what makes you an expert in your field, sir?
Well, first off, thank you, Stephanie and Meg, for hosting this really important topic. Value creation in business is certainly not the only thing that matters, but it is important, particularly for owners and founders. So as you asked me to do, I'll introduce, I am not wearing yoga pants, I'm wearing regular pants, but thank you.
Duly noted.
I'm Scott Ulvi, for those in the audience who want to know a little bit about my background. I am no longer a government contractor, so I effectively escaped and retired. Hopefully what some would call early. I'm still in my 50s. But I'm the founder and former CEO and president of Triumph Enterprises. We are a small to mid-sized government contractor serving the IT security, program management, and data analytics capability markets in the federal sector. I was CEO for about 13 years, started the company in 2006, and between 2006 and 2018, the company was able to achieve over $260 million in billed revenue over that 13-year period. So a lot of revenue, which is interesting, but more interesting and value related is the profit that the company generated in those 13 years. We generated over $30 million of collective revenues or profits during that period. And so the question is, well, is how did that happen? And we'll get into that with Stephanie's presentation, but a big part of that was being surrounded by people like Lynne and Libba, who are key advisors to our industry and have been really important to us to help us see beyond what we currently can see. And they've helped us implement things like value creating mechanisms that they'll talk about specifically. But what important was mattered to most to me was the company had a really strong planning ethos. And we did that rigorously throughout the year and at the end of the year and for multiple periods. So I think if I had to say one thing about what value creation is today and how to really do it well. Is get good at planning. So I think
All right, you're jumping right in, Scott. I'm cutting you off right there. All right, don't worry, we got plenty more. But one of the key takeaways that I absolutely love, and GovCon, listen up, people. Top line is just for your ego. Bottom line is what matters. It's always, always, always about the profit. I don't care what your top line is. Anyway, so I'm so glad that you made that point, because that's honestly what matters. All right, Lynne, who are you and what makes you an expert in your field?
Thanks, Stephanie. So I am Lynne Gummo. I actually just formed LHG Advisory last year. I have over 30 years working with business owners like Scott, specifically in the government contracting space. I've helped counsel business owners from startup clear through to, actually my largest client was almost $1 billion in revenue. But I primarily focus my attention to that small to middle market business owner who is growing their business and looking for some strategic advice. And after 30 years, I've actually seen a lot of things that business owners have done very, very well, and a lot of things where business owners probably wish they would have made a different decision or taken a different path. And so over those years,
that's consultant speak for they really screwed it up. And don't worry, guys, we were going to talk about some of the horror stories, because I got to tell you, those are the fun ones, and those are the things you want to know about, right? What did my partners do that, or what did somebody else do that I want to make sure I don't do? Right, Lynne?
Yeah, and I think one of my business owners said, Lynne, you always told me what I didn't want to hear. And I feel like that's my job, is to find that risk to help propel our government contractor owners' goals forward.
Exactly. And here's how not to screw it up. Learn from others' mistakes. All right, finally, absolutely not least at all, definitely not last. Libba Keith, tell us who you are and what makes you an expert in your field.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Just as Stephanie said, I'm Libba Keith. I am from G Squared Capital Partners. I lead the valuation service and client development for G Squared. G Squared, if you're not familiar, and we did start in April 2020, which is a great time to start a business. But so if you're not familiar with the name, we are an independent investment bank focused on the middle market. We specialize with aerospace, defense, and government services companies. So we work with companies that are truly in the lower end of the middle market. That's our sweet spot, about 25 million to 150 to 200 million, providing mergers, acquisition, or capital markets transaction advisory services. So I think the reason why Stephanie asked me to be on this panel, one is that from my evaluation experience, I've performed over, I'd say, 500 valuations for companies in the government contracting space for either strategic or accounting purposes. So I've seen a lot of those horror stories, had to tell many more companies than I would like that their babies aren't beautiful. And then probably even more relevant to some of the conversations we're gonna have today is that since an inception of G Squared Capital, we've closed 5 transactions in the second half of 2020. We have 2 more in the market right now, and a couple more that we're about to deploy. So there hopefully are some good stories and themes that we're seeing that we can share with you that help with value. So
exactly. So let's dive right in, because I think everybody could come away from this with different perspectives of what value is. I always joke with everyone that we're all GovCons. We all want to grow our businesses to the magical, mythical $100 million, and then we're going to sell and buy a private island, right? Like that's what the big hoopla is. But that's not necessarily the same thing as creating value. It's not exactly what value is. So I'd like to get each of your perspectives on what is value to you, so that we're all speaking the same language, and then we'll go deeper into ways to create it. Anybody who wants to start? Libba, you want to start with what is value for you? Sure. Especially with your valuation background.
Right. So if I go to the true definition and nerd out just a little bit, the value of any asset, and the way that I view it's the future value of those cash flows. But from this investment banking perspective, we see future cash flows as the sellability, the marketability of those future cash flows, and would there be customer demand for those cash flows in the future? Would there be a buyer universe? So for my perspective, when I'm talking about value, a lot of the themes that speak to are going to be synonymous with sellability and marketability.
Sellability. Okay. Lynn, Scott, your perspectives?
I guess I'll go next. Like Libba, I mean, I come from a financial background, so those critical value drivers that are evaluated from what results in a sale, obviously, most people think of for what that indication of value is for a government contractor. However, when working with business owners, and I'm working with several of them right now, and they're looking for a potential exit in 5 years, they see their value drivers differently. They acknowledge the financial, but what they're focused on is their culture, their people, what their purpose is, and what the mission is of the organization that they're trying to accomplish. And they say, well, if it results in financial value, then that's great for me. And I feel that we can't lose sight that that's what we're hearing a lot from our business owners. But the true value is really what a third party is going to potentially look at your company in the future, because at some point in the future, there's an end game and there is going to have to be a transition. We're not here forever. So there's got to be a transition for your company. So being able to really ultimately look at how you create that value within your organization, your sustainability and your market performance is really going to be critically important, because at the end of the day, it's not what you believe the value is, it's what a third party is going to view the value of your company.
Value is in the eye of the beholder and the eye of the buyer, correct?
Right.
Scott, what is your definition? I know from your perspective, having sold and kind of, seeing that side of it, what would you say your perspective of value is?
I mean, I agree with the technical definitions that Libba and Lynn have just given you, but from startup to conclusion, which for me was a successful exit through a sale to an ESOP trust, I would tell you that value changes in the beginning to where it is at the end. Now, the measurements are going to be the same along the way, but when you're starting a business, growing a business, what's important to you are the people that are helping your company be successful. So value is what they define it as, what your customers define it as. Because if you're trying to create a built to sell company, you're going to go about it way different than you're going to build a company that's built to last. And a built to last company is probably is going to spend a lot more time worrying about things like Lynn mentioned with culture, stuff like that. And that's really important for early buy-in for the earliest stakeholders in a startup company. So I think that where you measure value and how you define value depends on where you are in the business's life cycle and whose perspective you're taking it from. The owner's perspective ultimately is where theoretically the value is going to find its end at some point, but that's the shortest period during the business's life cycle. If you're going through a transaction, the business owner's exiting, they spent most of their life in the other stages of development. So I think that's where I'd stop.
That's just the tail end. Okay. So thank you all for your perspectives. I want to start, we'd be remiss if we didn't at least give some discussion around the M&A market as Libba. So you guys just started, you started a company right after a pandemic, and now you've got 5 sales under your belt in a very short amount of time, 2 teed up and more going on. So are you just amazing people, which you are, or is the market just hot as all get out? So what's going on M&A wise?
Right. Well, I appreciate that. I would like to think it's all because of us, but
sure it is.
It's definitely been an interesting year, right? So there's kind of a perfect storm of a couple different things that are happening. Really kind of going back to April, I would say that's when everything shut down, frozen. We thought that it would take a couple months for market interest to return. But it quickly, once debt markets opened up, buyers and everyone kind of already focused on their infrastructure, they were ready to restart the government contracting M&A market, right? So the market started to thaw right around May. We launched our deals around June. And within that time frame, it's just been crazy. I'm sure everyone's been seeing the different press releases. And so some of those factors that's creating this perfect storm and why there's been so much activity, one, it's going to be a continuation of 2019, where we saw a lot of all-time highs, a lot of market activity. And so it's really the backlog of what was supposed to be going on in the first half of 2020 and then coming forward. But then we also saw some new owners jump into the market because they saw the potential change in administration, which did come to fruition, and those potential policy changes that will be coming down the pike. So those that were on the fence decided maybe this is the time for me to go ahead and jump in. Also, the potential uncertainty from the increased debt that we're taking on, we're eventually going to pay the piper. You know, uncertainty does create opportunity in certain areas. So that also motivated some sellers to get back into the market. And then so that's going to be your supply. On the demand side, and why it's that perfect storm is that right now there's so many different buyers in the marketplace. And then because of 2020, government contracting industry has been seen as even more valuable, and because it is a safe haven for a lot of private equity holders and funds. And so more people are interested in putting money into the government contracting space. So that's created a great supply and demand situation that a lot of people are capitalizing on in 2020. So you know, it's a strong M&A market across the board that we're seeing.
Lynn, anything further to add? Meg, please, next slide, please.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like 2020 has been interesting. A lot of the clients that I'm working with, they had really high hopes in 2020. There was a lot of movement. They knew there was an election, but they knew that that just meant that they were going to try to have a lot of funding of programs before there was a changeover potentially in the White House. And then COVID hit and brought everybody to a screeching halt. So a lot of the contractors that I'm working with actually had still a great year. I mean, they are fortunate in that they're in programs that might have had some delays, or maybe had just being able to work from home, but change the environment that they were working in, but they still were able to move forward. However, they did hit a situation where a lot of the procurements they were counting on this year either got delayed or pushed to the right. And so, but that also helped them too, because their current contracts that were under recompete got pushed to the right too. So they did experience maybe not as great financials this year. And obviously they're still coming in and closing out, but it wasn't the banner year that they thought they would have. And my takeaway from that for a lot of people who are on the call, one of the things that it's very apparent, I am working with a lot of companies to try to help better plan, predict, and take risk out of their budgeting. And a lot of clients have said, well, you know, I do budgeting, I got that, don't have to worry about it. Well, it was a make or break year. Those who are really good at predicting what their future was, where they needed to maximize their contracts, where they can deploy their resources to address the decline in the market, were successful. They actually survived this and survived it well on paper. Those who didn't, who said, yeah, I got that, and really didn't, it came up today as we look at the financials, because they probably, without that PPP loan forgiveness, had a loss this year, or best case break even. So it just showed the weaknesses within an organization. And my advice to a lot of people on the call is, hey, make note of that and align yourself so you can prevent that from happening in the future. Because I think 2021 is going to be a tough year.
So to follow that back up, Libba, back over to you. So you discussed 2020. You've got 2 deals in the hopper, more coming in. What are your tea leaves for 2021? And then I want to dive back into the things that drive the value for 2021 and beyond. Right.
So right now we are think that things will hold strong through the midterm, through 2021, launching deals. I think it will still take some time to implement any tax changes or other things that could cool the market a little bit more. And overall, we are, as a firm, bullish still on government contracting M&A. I think what is looming, as you're hinting to, is, a couple of years down the road, when COVID is conquered, there's been some recovery in the economy. We do expect to see pressure on discretionary spending, similar to 2008 and LPTA. And so we are going to eventually have to pay for that debt. And so, we don't think that it will be as extreme as, the drop off, just because there are so many new entrants to the government contracting M&A market of buyers, like private equity, that will help bolster the market going forward. But there's definitely going to be cooling. And I think that, as people say, doom and gloom of when all this is going to end, our stance is that good companies will continue to be valuable. And as Lynn mentioned, that fundamentals were exposed this past year in 2020 and so, one thing where we see valuations kind of continuing to go is that that highly desired companies will stay strong. Companies that are not as sellable, and which we'll kind of get into, those valuations probably start to see some lightening over the years. And then businesses that don't have these fundamentals in place are challenging, that like right now you could basically sell a lot of different companies. Those are going to be very challenging to sell after 2021 for sure. So but a good company that has strong fundamentals will continue to be valuable, and there'll always be a market for that.
Absolutely. So the one thing we can always guarantee in GovCon is that the pendulum will swing, and it will swing wildly in the opposite direction, and it will always overcorrect. So welcome to GovCon, and you just hopefully can sell. It sounds like sell now while the getting's good, or hunker down and really try to drive value for several years out. Right. So to drive that value, let's talk, Lynn, let's start with you with a couple of things that you're thinking about with regards to what will drive value, near term, short term. Like, I want to sell, I'm going to call Libba after this phone call. I'm going to sell I'm done. I'm out. I got to go like this month, or 4 or 5 years from now, next election cycle, after we've dealt with deficits and sequestration and all the other crap that inevitably will probably come. LPT. I don't even want to hear the words LPTA yet, Libba. Come on.
Sorry.
And you forgot the word sequestration. I mean,
right?
Definitely is a dirty word. So
it all came from. Yeah, Stephanie, I think that I do think that 2021 is going to be a difficult year, a challenging year for a lot of contractors. One, we've got a complete changeover in the White House and Congress, and we know from history that probably means a change and a shift in where programs get funded. And hopefully, as a business owner, you talk about driving value. I mean, one of the number one things that you can, first of all, you need to focus on what you can control, but what you can control is how you plan and position your company and understand the market and understand how the market will impact your company and what you can do to change that. So I feel that that's a long-term play, and you need to start thinking about that. Hopefully you thought about that already, but if you haven't, it's a good time to start thinking about that. But then I think it's back to what I mentioned earlier and what Libba said is really focus on the blocking and tackling. I mean, creating accretive value. And I went working with Scott's company. I thought his company was one of the best run companies I've ever worked with. And when I became his CFO, I was still able to squeak out another $1 million of profit to his bottom line. That's accretive value that's maximizing a return that he hopefully received when he got his final valuation. And the thing is that you can put a budget together, you can put a forecast together, but if you don't manage to your budget, if you don't do the fundamental and rigor of evaluating how different changes in your business impact your business and be able to predict that, you don't have any credibility in your financial statements. And at some point in the future, as you continue to look at an acquisition of another company, or you're going to make an investment and you need outside financing and capital, you're going to have critical and credible financial statements that people can rely on. And if you don't, and you have that risk in your financials, you've just created risk for your company, which means it's going to cost you more money in the end. And so when Libba looks at it from a valuation standpoint, She's going to say, hey, this company has really done a great job at the basic blocking and tackling, maximizing the value on their contracts. Their financial statements are predictable and reliable, and I have less risk. A business, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, and a business owner, that's a value. That is a huge value that people don't think about. They only think about, hey, I'm just going to grow 20% every single year. And the problem is that, and we can talk to Scott about this, you don't necessarily grow every single year. You will have a decline year, and you need to be able to figure out what those scenarios are and how you can plan for them today, so that if they do happen, you can successfully navigate through them.
Libba, would you agree? A lot of companies, as we talk kind of like good news, bad news, focus on that top line. And while the top line, again, is sexy and exciting and NAICS code driven and all the things, it really is squeezing out the value in the middle to get to the profitability. I mean, is that your perspective as well? Is that where you've seen the higher valuations?
And that was to me, right? Stephanie?
Yes.
Sorry.
And then I want to ask Scott what he did differently to get that value.
Yes, I would completely agree with or that Lynn has said, because even in government contracting, a shorthand way to account for valuation are EBITDA multiples, right? We don't use revenue multiples. And so even though I think that's not, when people focus on multiples, you're missing the true concept of what enterprise value is. But yes, it is, a $20 million company revenue, say, and but they could be very little profit, and their fundamentals would make them less valuable than, say, even a $10 million revenue company that's providing, has a better infrastructure, providing more highly specialized services, is controlling that bottom line, and is truly very profitable. That could be drive a higher multiple versus a just a higher revenue company, for sure.
So Scott, from your perspective, where did you, if you want to give me kind of like where you thought you did well on driving that growth, not the top line, but everything below, like where do you think you guys hit it out of the park? And then Lynne and Libba, I want to hear horror stories next.
Top line is important, right? Without top line, you don't have bottom line, right? So your ability to grow the business and sustain the business over the course of time will help you to make better decisions year over year. So I would say that if you don't have a really good growth engine, you're going to always be trying to cut to retain a profit margin. And that's a terrible existence. And the company was fortunate to never have that experience, partly because we knew we had to manage the top line and the bottom line to a target. So when I started the company, I set a target of double-digit profits every year was my target. Now, that didn't drive business decisions. It was a target, and it was a target to create value. So, but managing when you're having a great year, managing the stuff out of the middle isn't that hard. When you're having a bad year, or when you're having a year you weren't expecting, sometimes it's hard, but only if you're not paying attention on a regular basis. So we would squeeze out, I'll give you one concrete example. When we were in 2010, I went to what was I would call my CFO at the time. I didn't have a CFO, but was managing our financials. And about June, he comes back and says, we're going to lose money this year. I'm like, we're going to lose money. We're on year 4. We're doing great top line. And where? He'd forecasted out we were going to lose about $500,000. Like, okay, we got to do something about that. We finished that year probably the best year in 5 years because we paid attention mid-year. Now that's rare to be able to pull off mid-year in a government contracting space, because we all know the upside and the downside of government contracting is their long-term contracts typically. So the cycle that we're in right now, you've got contracts that are probably going to survive this. That's certainly what happened to us. But at the end of the day, you still have to prepare to pivot, because the long term means you got to be the longer preparation times to get out of that. So I don't know if that answered exactly what you were looking for, Stephanie, but those are the things I would say focus on.
Okay. Libba and Lynne, I would like to hear specific examples, because let's get into the dirty details that people can really walk away with. Any really, really great things that you've seen that have driven value, or the horrific train wrecks that we all need to avoid. We'll take all.
I guess I'll go next. Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like I have a lot of horror stories, but the ones that are just relevant that I'm dealing with some current clients is one thing when COVID hit, we really wanted to focus on making sure that we had a good picture at the end of the year. And I know mid-year, I've heard so many clients saying, hey, we don't want to just survive. We want to be able to pivot and really make this a great year, even though we know that we've got challenges. And fortunately, with government contractors, we knew that we had the work. We didn't know how much we were going to have, but we knew what we had in the bank, so to speak. The challenge is that a lot of the companies that I just started working with didn't have good, I'm going to say, program review and accountability in place. And so one of the things that I was trying to focus companies on this year is, hey, make sure you're maximizing the value on your contracts and make sure that you're going to get every single dollar that you believe that you are able to obtain, or even try to get additional positions or work on those contracts. And what ended up happening is they don't plan well enough in advance, and they didn't plan that the government was going to be shut down for 2 weeks, or they didn't plan that there was going to be vacation taken, or they didn't plan that that they weren't going to be able to be in their SOC 24/7, and therefore they lost, even though they had positions filled, they weren't going to be able to do the work. And so they waited and to address that to the last minute, and they left it in the hands of the program managers, and the programs managers, yep, I got this. I'm going to spend that money. And at the end of the year, we found where they left $500,000 on the table or more because they said they got it and they didn't. They didn't plan enough. They didn't have enough forethought to think about how that was going to impact them. And it was a difference between them making a profit this year and a loss. So, I mean, that's a real life example, and it's short term, but now they've got that on the books, and that's going to be carried forward. And you can say, yep, it was a COVID year and we had a loss, but frankly, they didn't have to. They could have been in a profit and demonstrated they had good, solid rigor in their management team to be able to survive a difficult year.
So CEOs, I'm taking away, your program manager may have told you that you're going to spend that underrun, but you want to actually look at the data behind it to ensure that you actually are, track it on a monthly basis at a minimum, and double check, because, you know, are the timesheets complete? Are you billing? Are you maximizing every freaking thing on this contract, to your point? Otherwise you're leaving money on the table. Libba, do you have any thoughts on this in terms of things that you've seen done really well, or absolute train wrecks? We'll take both.
Well, definitely. I think along the same theme that, you know, Lynne and Scott both pointed out, is not focusing so much on the short term and not thinking about that long term. And where this comes into play that we've seen the most horror stories are where it's been really hurt value is for looking at your contract portfolio. And if you are a small business contractor or an 8A contractor, not effectively using the program to refine your service offering and build infrastructure of those cash flows while you are 8A contract, while you are a small business contractor, so that you are not arming yourself appropriately or as best as you can, so that when you do graduate, you can compete in a full and open space and continue on. And so what we see the most often is that business owners can be focused on, yep, I got this next contract, and building revenue, check, 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 but they're not thinking strategically about how they are building their long-term value and what's going to happen when they reach that cliff, or when they can't, they don't qualify as a small business anymore. And that can be, you know, I've seen either revenue drop substantially, really go off that cliff, and then they're back under in a few years, a small business, or, you know, they've just realized that there isn't actually a market for companies to buy them, which is, you know, as I perceive value, sellability. There's a company like that is not marketable. So the takeaway is to be, if you are a small business contractor, which, you know, in 8A, to effectively be using those programs to build your service offering your capabilities, build your infrastructure, use those cash flows in a smart way. One example of then kind of the flip side of how things have started thinking long term, one of the companies that we sold in November, Aurotech. So we met with Aurotech 3 years ago. And they started thinking about when they wanted to exit. We had conversations with them. For you to have a successful exit, these are a few things that you need to do. That management team, they hunkered down, they focused on those, and they had an exceptional exit. And so it was a good outcome of starting to look into the future, know where you want to be, and planning today for those steps to achieve those goals.
How important is the role of, one of the key takeaways that I always say is know what you do and know what you don't do. How important is the don't do as well, in terms of like, oh my gosh, it's 2020, things are crazy, we should go after everything, we should, you know, and it in my mind, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try new things. It's just, let's not get too cray, we're in GovCon for Pete's sake.
Yeah, let me pick at that, Stephanie, because we were in that circumstance. I would tell you probably in 2014, 2015, where the company's pipeline just wasn't getting where we needed to be, because we were trying to achieve escape velocity out of the small business program that Libba just mentioned. And that is really, really hard. But I would tell you that it was important for us to get more focused than less. And so when you're trying to shoot at everything just because you're in a tizzy that you're not going to achieve your future growth, it's not a good use of time and resources. And so we spent a lot of money and a lot of time trying to chase everything we could, just so we could build a robust backlog for our own valuations, because we were anticipating the ESOP transaction. So I would say, don't shoot at everything. Have the rigor and the discipline to say, you know what, we're going to just do what we can where we're good, and then just stick to it.
Lynn, Libba, any follow-on thoughts to that? Thank you, Scott.
Piggybacking on Scott, that's exactly, our advice to business owners is that one of the biggest things that we consider drive value is, and how you pick at that, is what is the company's storyline? What's their DNA? Who are they? Every company should be able to answer, who are you? What are you doing? And who are you doing it for? What are those contract mechanisms that are allowing you to deliver those services? And it needs to be a cohesive story. And one way that one of my colleagues, Greg Nossman, always says is, what would be the headline of the press release when you were acquired? And use that as a way to filter, should you go after these new business opportunities or should you not? So we are a high-end DevSecOps provider to the Air Force, and using that as a way to not chase everything. Because really what is more valuable are those companies that are specialized, and meaning that they're also differentiated from everyone that can be does a little bit of everything. That's where we see really big value drivers. So staying true to your DNA, having a cohesive story is really important in driving value from what we see.
And I can add a little bit more to that. And we experienced it with Scott's company, but understanding your DNA, but also understanding where your customers buy. And one of the things that I think a lot of my clients have been challenged with is, I have some clients that go after every single schedule under the sun, but once they get it, they don't do anything to market on it. And then I have the other school of thought, like, well, if we don't have people to market on it, then I'm not even going to go after the vehicle. But bottom line is, if your customer goes to that vehicle to buy, you need to be on it. And so thinking ahead today about where those customers are going to be buying, there's a lot of schedules coming out for renewal or changeover, and people need to be prepared today. Well, what do I need to even qualify for that future schedule? CIO SP4, and we've got Polaris coming out. And so all of those things people need to be thinking about as far as, well, what do I need if I need 3 past performances in cybersecurity and I only got 2, I've got to get some work before I can even qualify to get on that schedule. So, I mean, really thinking forward and planning that and being intentional about it is critically important to be able to get you where you want to be to drive value.
And I feel
One
like
thing I want to pick up, I'm sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Government has gotten better at sharing what they want. I mean, GSA has done some pretty important things for the contractor community to say, hey, don't even bother wasting your time if you can't meet this criteria for OASIS or COSP4 or whatever. So, and those multi-generational contracts are going to be coming back around 4, 5, 6 years later. So you can do some of the things that Lynn was just saying, because we tried to do that ourselves, but it is a long-term intentional commitment to a strategy.
The infamous scorecard approach, and take a harsh look at yourself. And if you are not going to pass this first time, let's not spend the G&A. But to Lynn's point, the timing, when they're back up for onboarding, and offboarding. So having a long-term strategy. Meg, I definitely want to take questions. So for anybody who is interested, please write your questions, and we're going to start moving towards that, as I realize we could talk about the subject for hours and hours. But one thing as Meg's kind of prepping for that, I wanted to get your perspective on timing and the role of timing, and kind of feel like it kind of goes to what you just said about the 5-year plan. Is it a 6 months plan? Like, what is the role of timing as we talk about this? And that's open for anybody.
The role of
timing of the market, timing of so when you want to sell, hey, can I just pick up and say I want to sell next week? Because let's face it, I'm tired, I'm done, let's go. Or, I mean, what is the role of timing in as we create value? Well, I memean, I feel like, and I've heard this from Scott, so I don't want to steal your thunder, Scott, but you as soon as you become a business owner, you should be looking at what your end game is and planning for your end game, even though you don't know what it is. I can tell you the reason why I've gotten with several of the clients that I'm currently with is because they want to do value creation because they intend to do some type of transaction or transition in the next 5 years. And the big question mark, well, is that even enough time? And I think it is. I mean, to Libba's point with her company, they had presumably a good foundational government contracting business that they could then refine so that they could get ready for a sale in 3 years. However, if you haven't had a lot of discipline within your organization, it might take you longer, but it's going to take a lot of focus and a lot of support to be able to transition your organization into creating that accretive value that you're looking for to be able to do a transition, whether it's a sale, an ESOP, or even a transition to a management buyout, or whatever you plan in your future. And really, again, focused on what is that outside entity going to expect from your organization that's valuable, not necessarily what you believe is valuable. So making sure that you're taking an honest look and being realistic about the true value of your organization and where you can have an impact. So Lynn, that's a great jumping off point. So there are definitely some questions revolving around multipliers, ESOP. So let's start steering down that path. The first thing I want to know, which Libba, I'm totally putting you on the spot because this is what everybody probably asks you at every single time. What are the multipliers in GovCon? How much money will I make? Is it going to be an easy thing? This is what everyone wants to know. And I know that you're going to give me a somewhat lawyer answer. It depends, but let's try and give me a little more than that.
Well, Stephanie, it depends. Right. So, yeah, maybe taking a step back, the different components to what we see for enterprise value and what drives those multiples. In addition to market forces, which we can't control, you have the sellability of the contract base, which we've talked about, the core business fundamentals, which we've also kind of talked about, your management team, your financials, and then your specialization and diversification. So those 4 components go into what we consider as valuation multiples. And that's whether you are a company that's on, say, 3 to 5 times. So what we see 3 to 5 times, that's EBITDA, would typically be companies that are a little more commoditized, that have restricted work, and so could have some more sellability concerns. And then as you move up the different breakpoints are multiples, I would say 3 to 5, then say 6 to 8 or 5 to, moving up. That's what's going to increase those multiples are companies that are more specialized. And when I say specialized, it doesn't mean that 100% of your business needs to be, cybersecurity, right? I mean, when we say specialized, that's, your core DNA, your story is, fundamental, and you're providing a certain service. So 50 to 60% of your work is what you have as your DNA. And the other could be, say you do, this is a terrible example, but say cyber, and then do 30% help desk or something. So, but if a buyer's looking at you, they see you as this type of company. And then the less restricted work you have starts to increase that multiple. There's not a wealth of middle market full and open companies anymore, right? Because they've all been bought up. So now there is an expectation that there would be some percentage of restricted work there, but it needs to be a pathway to being able to compete in full and open, or that the capability is so essential, what your service you're providing, that a buyer would be attracted to it and they need that service. So where you're going to see the crazy valuations, the double digits, so the other end of the spectrum, that's going to be something that is going to be incredibly mission focused, something that's close, it's going to be funded, right? So the less riskier, or how you can de-risk those cash flows. It's going to be, a buyer will be able to perform work on it. So it's going to be not restricted. Diversified, and are not differentiated, and it's going to be probably in this environment some of the more sexier areas of the government, emerging technologies, IT transformation, where you're looking to see this next administration spend a good amount of money. So I know I kind of skirted around that answer, but hopefully to give some boundary.
And I appreciate it. I appreciate the scramble. So really focusing, you've kind of got your different layers, as I wrote down, the kind of 3 to 5 EBITDA, which is just kind of some block and tackle stuff and very commoditized, not very sexy. If you're not sexy, you probably know it. So you got a whole bunch of this small business sauce in there. You're kind of just doing what everybody else is doing, blah, blah, blah. Then you've got your kind of 6 to 8, which is slightly more sexy, more specialized, less of the small business sauce, as I like to call it. You're starting to really develop that pipeline, blow it out, starting to see some full and open. You've got some stuff under your belt. You're feeling good about it. And then 10 plus is in our super well-funded, super special, oh my gosh, everybody has a TSSCI and aren't they amazing, space that somebody can come in, gobble you up, take immediately over your contracts. They're profitable. They want your people. They want the past performance, and they want the customer, right? Is that a good kind of strategy?
And one thing that I should add, so of the 5 different transactions we did this year, each of those companies were different, and they all had different types of drivers that put them in, and it's a different mix of those different qualities, right? That allow them to achieve certain multiples because of that. So it's not
thank you. Now I kind of want to shift over to you, Scott. So the whole ESOP thing, I think people are still kind of a little like, what made you, I mean, just if you can give us some perspective. We have a couple questions. When would an ESOP be a good fit? Why did you go ESOP? Like what's this ESOP thing? Not really what is it, but like, What are you thinking there? Or what was kind of like the strategy behind that versus going kind of more with a traditional buyer seller M&A perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, ESOP was a consideration from the very earliest days of the company. I probably started looking at ESOP in the first 3 to 4 years because I was building a company to last. I wasn't building a company to sell. I had an exit in my mind, so I don't think they're disconnected. You can build a company to last and expect to sell. But I looked at ESOP early on because you can retain your culture. You can retain the things that are valuable to the owner and to the employees and the internal stakeholders and the clients for that matter. So the original plan was to do a partial transaction in 2015 because the company we were coming off our best year in 2013. We'd achieved $35 million in sales. We'd achieved, probably a 12 to 13% profit margin. We were flying really high. So it's like, we're going to get a good valuation. So when your valuation is going to be high is a good time to think about, regardless of what the transaction is going to be a good time to think about it. But I spent a lot of time in my early days. I didn't come out of the M&A space. I didn't have the expertise that Lynne and Libba have. So I spent a lot of time in M&A environments. I talked to M&A lawyers. I talked to M&A accountants. I talked to evaluation experts for years, just trying to understand how they think. And I went so far as to say, I want to acquire a company so I can get the experience of a buyer, so I could get my mind around what buyers think. And then I didn't sell to a buyer, right? I sold to an employee stock ownership plan, which is, if you really are interested in that, that is a complex equation. And you need to really spend a lot of time looking at that. And there are bodies of knowledge in the world, and Lynne would be a key one. She was instrumental in helping us formulate the transaction. And we did it right. The timing for us was opportunistic. I was ready to exit the business, had been ready. And it just worked out well. And the time when we actually concluded the transaction in 2017, we did it so the company could be successful through it. Two key things. I sold the entire stock portfolio to the trust as an S corporation. So that immediately made the company 100% federal tax free. So every dollar we would have spent paying taxes, the company could use for paying off the debt, for things like that. And then I took 100% seller notes so that the company wasn't crushed with cash in that closing year. And that allowed us to manage the company because we were looking at some potentially down years in the out years. And I was like, well, let's not do that. Let me, the seller, help, and the CEO, let me make decisions on when we can and can't pay the debt down. And we never reached a point where we couldn't pay debt. So it gave us a lot of leverage. And I think that was important for us. But I'll stop there because if you want to know more about Triumph's transaction, Lynne can certainly give you that because she was the CFO for a lot of that.
Yeah. Lynne, any last, and I know we need to wrap up because we're about 7 minutes out. So please get those last email or questions in and we will try and hit as many as possible. I've also wrangled our speakers into answering questions offline afterwards. If anyone would like to send us an email, we're happy to connect you guys. Lynne, any kind of starting to wrap up, but final thoughts on ESOP versus the M&A versus just kind of just building value in general?
Yeah, I really do feel like each situation is a little bit different, and you really have to evaluate what the best scenario is for your situation and being realistic about it, and realize that if you're committed to doing a transaction, that relying on Libba, Stephanie, I know you do a lot of this support as well, on your advisors and to help guide you as to making those decisions are critically important. I will tell you ESOP is definitely a credible opportunity because I can tell you a lot of business owners, they just went out. They're just done. They've had it. And they want that alternative. And frankly, a third-party sale may not be necessarily an opportunity for them because they do have a lot of restricted contracts. And that's just the reality of where we are. So finding an alternative to be able to promote is critically important because that business, I'm guessing, is also going to support that individual owner for the future of their existence when they decide to finally hang up their professional career, and yet they still want to be committed and responsible to their employees. And there are options, but you have to be realistic about what those options are. And ESOP isn't easy. It's a very complicated transaction. The way Scott and Triumph did it is unique. Most people use a third-party lender. We didn't. We used Scott. And there was a reason why we did that. It reduces a lot of the risk for the company and the transaction being evaluated, but Scott took a lot of risk on, but that meant that the company had to perform to pay him out, and he was successfully paid out earlier this year. So that's a success story. And so those are my parting comments: is get the right people in place, use your advisors, plan, give yourself enough time to plan, and create some discipline within your organization.
Scott, if you'll give us your final thoughts on this one way or the other, and then Libba will wrap up with you.
Yeah, I would say, and I'm not going to really go into ESOP because it is a complex transaction. It's not for everybody. And there are implications if there's a secondary transaction beyond the ESOP that Libba would certainly color on if needed. But I mean, nobody told us when we started our business that this was going to be easy. It's not, right? Running a company is hard. The environment changes with time. You need to be adaptable to it. You can't forecast all of the things that are going to happen. Nobody would have forecasted 2020 the way they did. You just have to learn to adapt and have fun. You know, at the end of the day, I stopped having fun, and that's the reason I exited when I did. So I would encourage those owners who are tired and just losing enthusiasm for their business to find a way to either get your enthusiasm back or find somebody to come in and help take over for you that can drive the business forward. So that's all I'll say. Thank you. So
that's very good advice. And I think there's a lot of CEOs that I know personally that are kind of 2020 may have had an impact on everyone. And I think we're all tired, right? So I think that, Libba, I think that means there's a lot more potential clients for you guys as people are like, you know, I'm exhausted. Let's not do this anymore. So Libba, wrap us up. What are your final thoughts as you talk about valuations, M&A, the whole world as we're going through it?
Yeah, no, I think that Lynne and Scott have hit a lot of great points, and the overall theme is planning for the long term. And I think one of the joys of G Squared is that we do like partnering with business owners multiple years out from an exit. Surround yourself with advisors and people that will give you advice and guidance so that you can filter the decisions you're making today with the perspective of the long term. I mean, we recognize that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, right? So being smart about how you're building the company and your storyline, that DNA of the company really just drives value. So, I mean, investment banking is the worst model, I would say, business model, because we'll give you free advice, and just the hopes that, one day you might want to sell, but also giving good advice, being like, hey, this is not the right time for you, or there's things that you need to work on. So, definitely, Lynne and Stephanie, y'all are great advisors that can always provide sound advice as well to companies. So
I think one common thread is just the ability to tell people the truth, which sounds crazy, but some days your baby's not pretty and your baby's quite frankly ugly, but better to hear it from us than to have the shock value of walking into a data room situation or having your hopes and prayers and just completely bashed by a horrible evaluation or something like that. Right now doesn't necessarily mean never. It just means the timing may be off too. And there's some hard work to it. Scott, to your point, it's not easy. It's not easy for anybody. CEOs have hard jobs and building value is not easy. If it was, we all would be on those private islands. So
I think that's where Scott is, right?
Right, exactly. Although reference Scott, who might actually be on a private island. So that's
not private.
Well, thank you all for your time this afternoon. I want to, just for everybody in our audience, if there is something that we didn't get to for you, please feel free to send us a quick note. A couple quick scheduling things, if you will. We are going to send a survey right after this. Most of you will ignore it. I will love all the 12 of you that will actually respond. So thank you and for your responses. We do have our next GovMates Institute. We are tentatively planning on Wednesday, February 24th at 1 o'clock. And that will be, the topic is Let's Talk Money, my favorite subject. The role of venture capital and private equity in the non-traditional defense contractor community. So all about the money. There's definitely a theme as we are trying to build on creating value, being able to sell and get that magical island, and or continue to grow and grow in GovCon. Thanks everyone for your participation. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions, and we will see you at the next one. Thank you to our panelists as well. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Take care.